Good morning and welcome to another episode of What's Up with Power. We are here live on Zwift. We've got Mr. Taylor Thomas of Thomas Endurance Coaching lined up to give us a great presentation on where do I begin with training for power. And we're happy to have him. I'm especially happy he's on here because it's really hard to teach with only one arm. I fractured my clavicle couple weeks back. I'm not even sure Taylor knows this actually, and so here I am. You can see me on the live stream, arm in a sling, working it out. We got it going though. So let me bring him here on the screen. Make sure I've got his video set up properly. I had some issues this morning, and I think I can fix this quickly. Oh, I know what I need to do that. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Hey Taylor, how's it going?
Hey Justin. Yeah, I didn't know you broke your collarbone. Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. Exactly. Right. You're definitely not the first one to have said that, but I guess thanks for the welcome.
Yeah, it's happened to us all. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 20 seconds here before the group ride starts. Let me type some messages in here. Me. And reduce that power down a little bit. Sorry. One arm show this morning. Okay. And we're gonna switch. We got your slides up. I'm gonna come off the screen. I've got your one slide that says title slide up on the screen. Just let me know when to advance, Taylor.
All right, thanks, Justin. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning on another episode. So, like Justin said, we're going to be talking about what you need to do to get started training with power. So you have your power meter installed, and what do you do next, right? How do you take advantage of your power meter? So there's a good bit of information to cover. So we'll dive right in. Justin, you can go to the first information slide there. So data collection and FTP, right? So again, you have your power meter installed. You're excited to figure out what it is, what type of information it gives you. So lucky you, the first thing that you need to do is just go ride your bike. You want to familiarize yourself with the types of information that the power meter is giving you. You want to look at the type of power that you're producing on different types of terrain. So whether it's flat or hilly, different types of rides. So group rides, solo efforts, tempo rides. I also want to spend some time getting your computer set up. So your cycling computer, your head unit, whatever brand it is you're using, make sure that you're registering power correctly. Make sure you have your data screens set up to capture the information that you're interested in. And then also start to look at power in relation to some other metrics that you might be familiar with. So speed, cadence, you're probably training with heart rate or have been training with heart rate before you transition to power. So start to look at power in relation to those other metrics that you might be more familiar with, and that'll begin to answer a lot of questions for you, or just kind of couch power appropriately as a metric before you dive any deeper. The next thing that you want to do is you want to establish your FTP, right? Your functional threshold power. There's a lot of different definitions and explanations of FTP. You may have heard lactate threshold, anaerobic capacity. There's also more detailed versions or explanations of using the terms maximal lactate steady state or onset blood lactate. These are all terms that are referencing FTP, right? And so the important thing to know as you start to kind of weed through uh, the different types of information that's out there, or the different definitions of threshold, as you begin to think about setting your own and training with power, is that very simply, threshold is the highest power that a rider can maintain at a quasi steady state for approximately 1 hour, right? So kind of commit that definition to memory, because that's really the simplest version of what threshold is and what FTP and the concept of FTP is based off of. So keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward through some of these definitions and some of these terms, and that'll help you understand kind of what we're getting after. Next slide, Justin. All right, so you're riding your bike. You're starting to understand at least a little bit what the power numbers mean, what they look like, what different efforts are looking like. So now you have to determine your FTP, right? Functional threshold power. We've talked about it, I think, in every episode of What's Up with Power, because it's such a critical part of training and utilizing your power meter to its highest potential. So just like there's a lot of definitions of threshold, there's also a lot of different approaches to determining your FTP. There's many, many different ways to go about it. The more literature you read, potentially the more confusing it becomes as you understand or think about what approach works best for you. Do you determine your FTP in a laboratory setting? Do you determine it in the field? Do you use data that you already have available to you? So there's a lot of different ways, and ultimately, what's important is that you have one. So we'll go through a couple of those approaches so you understand what they look like. The first one, and maybe the easiest, is if you've already been training with power, certainly for some time, say the length of a season, and you have some races in your historical data, you have varied efforts, then using your historical data can be a valid way to determine your FTP. You can look at a power frequency distribution chart, which is the chart on the slide here, to understand where it is your FTP probably lies, and usually that's at the sharp end of the curve there as power starts to fall away dramatically on the right side. You can look at routine steady power. You can also look at normalized power, which is a term we've talked about on these episodes before. But there's several different ways to use the information that you already have to get an idea of your FTP, right? So to start to understand what that might be. Of course, there's also ways that are more complex and a little bit more time consuming, but potentially more accurate. You can use a 1 hour time trial. So if you remember on the last slide, we talked about that threshold is what you can maintain in a quasi steady state for approximately 1 hour. So it stands to reason that if you did a 1 hour time trial, that would give you a fairly accurate estimate of your FTP, albeit a 1 hour time trial is extremely hard. That would be it's a very taxing test to do, and it's going to take a proper build-up to make sure that you're ready for it. You're going to have to incorporate that effort into your training, and then you're also going to have to recover from that. So oftentimes it doesn't work for athletes, especially in the middle of a season. And you can also calculate your critical power, which is a fairly complex equation, but and I didn't dive or I won't dive deeply into critical power for the purposes of this presentation. There's a lot of detail in training and racing with a power meter if that's the route you'd like to go. It is a perfectly valid method to use, but it is fairly involved. So I just wanted to make you aware of it. Lastly, and probably the most common and most agreed upon approach is the kind of quote unquote field test, right? And that's your good old fashioned 20-minute time trial. You take the average power from that 20 minutes. You take 95% of that average power, again, because true threshold or actual threshold is for 1 hour. So we take 5% off of that average power to account for a percent loss in average power, or an assumed percentage of loss if you were to keep that or maintain that effort for an hour. So 20-minute test is what a lot of folks use. That's what you see on something like Zwift. That's what you see in a lot of training plans. That's what a lot of coaches use. The reason is because it's a fairly easy test to execute. Most people can hang in there for 20 minutes. They can wrap their head around the mental and the physical execution of that test, and it's a fairly accurate way to determine FTP. And again, FTP also is not necessarily, or it's not a hard number. FTP changes daily, right? It's something that's always shifting as we produce different efforts, as we come in and out of recovery, as we come in and out of hard races. So all we're trying to do is to make sure that we have the most accurate data point that we can get, and make sure that that's current and appropriate for our level of fitness. So the 20-minute test is a fine approach and what a lot of people use. Next slide. All right, so you've set your FTP, you've decided what approach you'd like to use, the field test, power distribution, whatever it is, and now you want to set your power-based training levels, right? So this is another another area that most folks, I'm sure, listening in are familiar with. You've seen some version of power-based training levels as you started to poke around and do some more dedicated training. So it's ultimately the way you're going to use your FTP on a daily basis for training. So you're going to take that number that you've calculated or that you've come up with based on historical data or laboratory testing, and you're going to calculate your individualized training zones, and then use that to base your training on. So that's kind of the most important thing to understand about how FTP relates to your training levels. Next, it's important to understand the effort, right? So now that you have your training levels set, what does that mean, and what do you want to look at? So there's a lot of different power-based metrics that help you understand the physicality of the effort, how intense the effort was, the wear and tear basically that effort is taken on your body, and understanding that average power. So say for instance, you finish a ride and you've finished it in tempo zone, right? Somewhere between 76 and 90% of your FTP, right? Well, different efforts could produce that net result, right? You might go out and do a tempo ride. You might spend 30 or 45 minutes in tempo zone, and the end result might be that the entire ride was in that 76 to 90% range. Conversely, you might do a road race, and at the end of that road race, despite all of the surges and breakaways and attacks and so on and so forth, the average power at the end of that ride was still in that 76 to 90% range. So you can see how those would be very different efforts, right? A solo tempo effort that's more of a workout that you're doing maybe midweek is much less taxing than, say a Saturday morning road race where you're responding to breakaways, you're surging, you're pulling off the front. And even though the average power may be similar, the assumed effort and the role or the toll that's taken on your body is very, very different. So understand that average power is not the be-all, end-all as you start to categorize your effort within these training levels. So calculating the levels on the slide here is an example of the individualized or the power-based training levels that Andy Coggan developed. These are the ones listed in Training and Racing with a power meter. This is a great place to start. This is 7 levels. They're fairly nuanced. They capture what's going on from a from a metabolic perspective, from an aerobic perspective within your body. So they're fairly detailed, and these are a good place to start. It's actually been taken a step further now, and Andy Coggan has developed individualized training levels. If you use WKO4, which is a piece of software presented by Training Peaks, you can get even more nuanced versions of these training levels. But this is basically how you would do it. You would take your FTP and you would take a percentage of that. So you take say your FTP is 200, you take 55% of 200, 75% of 200, and so on, and that would give you your ranges for each zone. And then training with the zones. So once you have them set, this is how you'll carry out your training, right? So power-based training is designed to be very specific. And so when you execute your workouts, when you come up with pacing strategies for time trials, when you come up with pacing strategies for hill climbs, these are the ranges you're going to use. So you're going to commit them to memory. You're going to know them like the back of your hand. You might tape them to your top tube. Whatever it is, these are going to be the ways in which you carry out the actual execution of your training. Next slide. So now that you have your power meter, you should always be collecting more data. Every ride obviously produces power numbers, produces some core metrics, whether it's average power, normalized power, intensity factor, TSS. Again, a lot of metrics that folks are probably familiar with at this point. But you want to utilize that data as best as you can. So you want to begin to understand how that data relates to the type of training that you're doing, how it relates to your goals. You want to understand that, say you produce 300 watts for 10 minutes. What does that mean? What are you trying to accomplish? And is that particular range or that particular data set from a power perspective, is that helping you get there? So making sure that that as you ride more, that your execution isn't arbitrary and you're using those power numbers to their fullest extent. Applying meaning to your rides. So just like I mentioned before, understanding what different rides look like, right? So you go out on your favorite Saturday morning group ride. Before, when you were training with, say, heart rate, that may have not had as much meaning, right? Heart rate is hyper variable, so it would have been hard to find any insights in that data, certainly within a short period of time. Now that you're training with power, you can go out on that ride and you can understand what that ride really means. Is it very intense? Is it easier than you thought it was, right? At the end of the ride, is it are you in zone 1 or zone 2 for the majority of the time? And you can use that to start to plan your efforts, to start to understand if that's the highest and best use of your time. So power can help to apply and give some meaning to some of your favorite routes, group rides, workouts that may have been more arbitrary in the past. And then always be looking for more insights. Continual data collection is really critical to always be touching on what are your strengths and weaknesses, right? So as you grow as a cyclist, as you grow as an athlete, those things can and should change. And power really helps you put a fine point on what those things are, and understand how it is your training has impacted the growth of your strengths, maybe the evolution of your weaknesses. And so continually and constantly reviewing your data, looking at the power numbers, understanding as best as you can what they mean, is going to make you a better rider, on a daily basis. And then as the seasons pass, you'll gain even more understanding of how to use those numbers, and how to become a better rider. So yeah, that's all I have. We'll take it question and answer now, and I'll kick it back to Justin.
Great. Thank you so much, Taylor. So we're going to open it up now for questions. If you have questions, let them fly in the Facebook comments. We will address them as they arise. We did have a comment that the audio was a little bit low. Taylor, hopefully I've addressed that. So hopefully he's coming through a bit clear. Also want to mention we've got Taylor's contact information here up on the screen. If you have any further follow-up questions for him or just want to get a hold of him, website is thomasendurancecoaching.com. Email is taylor@thomasendurancecoaching.com, or you can reach him on Twitter at @endurancecoach, endurance_coach. I really appreciate his appearance here on the show, his great insights. Something I wanted to mention on the, we talked a lot about all the different names for threshold, FTP, lactate threshold. And one thing I think is helpful to understand is all these methods of testing are really trying to estimate your lactate generation in your blood. So what we're trying to get at is there's a threshold at which your body starts generating essentially more lactate than it can clear. And that's kind of that's the point where that's your threshold, really. And so the only real way to measure that is to collect blood samples. But that's a little bit invasive, kind of difficult. So there's a lot of good approximations that get really, really close based on these 20-minute trials and everything. So that's really what we're trying to get at. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Taylor, I think the general threshold there is 4 millimoles of lactate per liter of blood. Is that right? Is that the threshold that usually is looked at?
Yeah, so that's kind of a generally agreed upon amount. To that end, it should, I guess, be mentioned that while you're thinking about threshold and potentially thinking about improving your threshold, right, which is one of the most important gains that any cyclist can make, right? So if you don't focus on anything else and you only have 2 hours a week to ride, you should probably spend that increasing your FTP. But to that end, the goal of training at FTP, or training to increase your threshold, is to increase your body's ability to clear that lactate, right? So working at or just below your lactate threshold, which is, like Justin said, your FTP, you can train your body to process that lactate faster, or what we call your lactate clearing capacity, and that's what gives you the ability to produce more power for longer periods of time. Again, keeping in mind that 20 minutes is not how long you can produce FTP. You can produce power at FTP for, it might be an hour, it might be over an hour, it might be 30 minutes. So the intent is twofold: to increase the actual number, but then also to increase the time at which you can sustain that power. So I think it's important to understand kind of what you're trying to accomplish from perspective of what's going on in your body, and that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes. Like Justin said, your body will eventually get overcome with lactic acid, and it can no longer produce. It basically shuts down working muscles, right? That's that burning feeling that you feel in your legs. That's when you can't push on the pedals anymore. But as you train, you can push that threshold further out, and you can train your body to produce that effort again at a higher wattage and for longer periods of time, because you're changing the way your body processes lactic acid.
Perfect. Yeah. And so I think understanding that leads a lot of people to understand when there's comments that basically say, we talk about this generally accepted 60 minutes, however much power you can hold for 60 minutes is your threshold. But as you just mentioned, there's more than one piece of information to your threshold. It's a power number, and it's a duration of time, technically, that you can hold it there. So 60 minutes isn't a golden standard. Some people may try a 60-minute test, and they might just not be able to actually hold their real threshold for 60 minutes. That's very common, actually. It's probably more common that people can hold it for around 20 minutes. And so that's exactly as you mentioned, why that test is much more popular, especially with entry-level athletes, or a lot of athletes, actually. Just because.
Right. Yeah, I mean, unless you're doing, unless you're a time trial specialist and you're, a 40K TTer, and that's your main focus, and you need to hold, at or above threshold basically for 50 minutes to an hour, or an hour and 10 minutes, however long it takes you to cover the 40K. Then most people, in my experience, are working well under that hour threshold, right? I'd say 30 to 35 minutes, is probably for, for more seasoned cyclists. That's probably where their threshold is truly at. Like you said, it's most people aren't going to hold it for an hour, and that's because it's extremely hard. It takes a very focused training to hold to train your body to clear lactic acid for an hour. Usually that I talked about blood onset lactic acid and or blood onset threshold, and that's kind of the concept, right? Is that the lactic acid builds up faster and too quickly for you to produce that effort for an hour, and that's just because it's a long time. It's very hard to do, and so yeah, most people are underneath that, and most people don't need to hold it for an hour, right? It can be a goal, but unless you're a time trial specialist, it might not be something that you necessarily need to focus on, because in a race day scenario, you're not gonna need to hold threshold for an hour. So that's something to think about too. Is again matching your training with what you're trying to accomplish, right, and where your time is spent.
Absolutely, great points. So I want to just mention that we've talked a lot about the different. Talked about Training Peaks software in here a lot, and one of the things WKO4 does is it models and gives you that. It'll give you a model of your FTP that uses your historical data, like we talked about. It also will give you what they believe your duration is. So it won't just say, hey, you can hold this for 20 minutes. We'll actually get a pretty scientific analysis of, this is my threshold, and this is how long I should be able to hold it for. And those two pieces of information and others are what lead into what Taylor was talking about, the individualized training levels. And that's something WKO4 provides. So Training Peaks is a great sponsor. They've provided us a discount code for watchers of the show. So if you decide to get Training Peaks premium services, you can use the code ODZ, like on my kit, ODZ20 or 20, to get 20% off premium services. So we really appreciate their support. Also want to mention that we've just opened up the online store again for the Team ODZ kit, this kit I'm wearing here. We've got it available. The store is open until next Friday, August 11th. So go ahead and get your order in now if you've been waiting to get that. I know people have been waiting and putting in pre-orders, so now you can actually make your order. So just go to teamodz.com/kit, K-I-T, and there'll be a link there to the online Castelli store. And that's where we're at with that. See here. So I think with that, do you have any further comments you wanted to make on the topic, Taylor? Any teasers on anything you've got coming up in your training or your racing or?
No, I mean, personally, always just out there beating myself up like everybody else. Trying not to break my collarbone.
Yeah.
Again, well, for the third time, I would be on number 3.
But, all on the same side? Yeah. The two were...
No, I'm evenly broken on both sides. My shoulders fall away at an even pace, on both sides.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, this is a really important topic. I mean, to go back to the presentation, I think, for folks to understand why it is that we're using FTP, right? So for the purposes of this short talk, I mean, it can be challenging to kind of convey all of the nuances of FTP and why it is we use this number. But it's something that now is really commonplace, and it's a term that gets tossed around, which is great. I mean, I think people having exposure to these metrics and to this terminology, especially newer riders. But my advice to those riders and even seasoned riders is to take some time to understand why it is you're doing these things, right? Why is it that we need to do this test, or why is it that you've chosen to perform one particular test or derive your FTP from one particular method versus another? And and what are your best zones? Should you be using individualized power zones, something that displays your strengths and weaknesses better than say just a normal, even like a standard like 5 or 6 zone setup? So I think once you have your power meter, it's important to understand a little bit of background, and have some insight to back up why it is you're doing what you're doing, versus just going out and doing a tempo ride because you read that tempo rides are good. And so power is fantastic because it allows you to pinpoint exactly when, exactly where, and exactly how you need to train. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so and we've gone into more detail in other episodes, but I think if this is people's first exposure, take a little time to dive into these concepts a little deeper. It'll really service them well, for the long term.
Okay. Thank you so much, Taylor. Group ride is over. We are out of time for the session. Thank you so much again for all your great insights. We'll be here again next week, same time, same channel, with more awesomeness on learning about how to use your power meter, how to get the best out of it, and that's what we're here to help you with. So we will be signing off, and we hope to see you again next time. Have a great day.